Howdy folks, hope you all had a great weekend and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. And I'm very happy to say that this episode of Mingles with Jingles has got itself a sponsor. Hopefully you're all aware by now that I don't accept sponsorships unless it's from a company or a product that I either use myself or am entirely happy to recommend to you, or both, and that is the case with today's sponsor, Incogni. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that every time you go on the internet, your personal data is being harvested by data brokers and sold on to, well, basically anybody who will pay for it. Usually, things like insurance companies or credit companies, making it harder for you to get credit and raising your insurance premiums without you even knowing anything about it. It's also possible that you may be aware that under most legal jurisdictions you're entitled to go after these data brokers and demand that they remove any information about you that they hold on file. Now that's fine in theory, but it's a lot harder in practice because, well, do you even know who these data brokers are? I mean, I didn't, but they knew who I was. And that's where Incogni comes in, because Incogni does all of the hard work for you. Incogni goes after the data brokers, submitting demands that they remove any data that they hold on file for you, and I'm actually pretty good about taking care of my online data. So when I signed up for Incogni's service, I wasn't particularly surprised to find that 69 data brokers that Incogni went after didn't actually hold any data on me, but a further 26 did. And Incogni not only got them to remove any of my personal data, they also slapped them with a suppression order to ensure that they couldn't accidentally re-add me back to their lists in the future, and they keep checking up on them to ensure that they comply with these legal requirements because, oh, would you look at that, sometimes some of them don't. So head over to incogni.com/jingles and use code JINGLES to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. That's incogni.com/jingles and use code JINGLES, or just click the link below to take your personal data off the market. Well, that's the bills paid. So moving on swiftly, medical news. As most of you are probably aware, I had the colonoscopy last week and it's bowel cancer, so I'm not that worried. I mean, no cancer is good cancer, but if you have to have cancer, bowel cancer is the one to get because it takes the longest to develop and it's the easiest to treat. And it's a weird, because I can remember quite clearly being aware of what was going on, even though I was sedated, so now my recollection of it all is a little bit fuzzy. But because you can see what's happening, because they have monitors set up on both sides of the bed so the patient can actually see what the doctor's seeing through the camera that they've jammed up your hoop. Another thing that I can quite clearly remember, because they, aside from all the bowel preparation that you have to do beforehand, the laxatives, which was fun, during the actual colonoscopy they pump your guts full of air to inflate your bowels to make it easier to get the camera around, and that means you are farting. Like the entire I don't know 20-minute procedure was just one long wet fart from start to finish. I can remember they had to ask me to stop farting so they didn't have to keep pumping me full of air, because as fast as the air was being pumped in I was just farting it all out. But oh, and it wasn't just air coming out. Yeah, it was quite nasty. But anyway, yeah, the cancer itself, the tumour, was only about an inch across. It wasn't very big. And as they poked and prodded it, it started bleeding. This is where all the blood and my stool's been coming from, obviously. But it does mean that the tricky little cancerous bastard has taught my body how to sustain it, because it's feeding itself off my own blood supply. So, yeah. The doctor said that he could have whipped it out there and then, but he wanted to leave it in place so they could do a CT scan on it, see if it's spread anywhere. And the CT scan was on Friday. That was a pain in the arse, pun not intended. I mean, the scan itself was a doddle. It was easy. It was about 6 minutes, but you have to get there an hour before because they give you this water to drink. It's about a litre, and you have to sip it slowly over the course of an hour, and it's got dye in it, which shows up under the CT scan, allowing them to contrast. The dye is basically what the scan picks up, and it allows them to contrast what should be there with what isn't. You get the idea. Medical stuff, I don't know. So I had to sit there for an hour drinking this bloody awful water, and then the scan itself only took 6 minutes, and then off home again. And so that was the colonoscopy on Sunday. I had the CT scan on Friday, and then tomorrow, Tuesday, back to the hospital. All of the results are in. And I sit down with the doctor and he tells me how we're going to proceed. And I'm not that concerned because, like I said, no cancer is good cancer, but if you have to get cancer, bowel cancer is the one to get. And it was not a big tumour. It was only about 1 inch across. The doctor was confident that he could have dealt with it there and then, but yeah, I'm not worried. We'll see what happens. Tuesday, talk to the doctor, find out how bad it is, and see where we go from there. But like I said, I'm feeling pretty good about it, and there's no actual pain or anything. So yeah, things could be a lot worse. I could have done what Eddie did and just let it go for months and months and months and hoped it went away by itself, and then it didn't, and it killed him. So yeah, don't mess around. If you think that there's something wrong, get it checked, and the sooner you get it checked, the better. Of course, the other good thing is I'm not being crippled with medical bills because we have social health care in this country. So I don't have to remortgage the mortgage that I haven't finished paying off yet in order to be able to pay for my medical treatment. It's all, well, it's not free. I mean, I have been paying for it my entire life. We pay, I can't remember what they're called, national insurance contributions out of our wages, and that's basically, that's our free healthcare, even though it isn't free because we do pay contributions. But yeah, I'm definitely getting my money's worth because once they know it's cancer, they don't mess around. I mean, you know, it took 6 weeks to actually get the colonoscopy, and that was, I mean, kind of partially my fault, although also not, because I wasn't aware at the time that I went for that initial consultation of just how at risk of bowel cancer I was, because I wasn't aware of my family history. And at the point where I was aware of my family history, you see, if it's a non-urgent colonoscopy, it's a 6-week waiting time. If it's an urgent colonoscopy, it's a 2-week waiting time. But by the time I knew that I was at actually quite severe risk of bowel cancer, 3 or 4 weeks had already expired, so it ended up being 6 weeks anyway, even though I then got the colonoscopy within 2 weeks of finding it. You get the idea. But even though, you know, we kind of dragged our feet a bit at the first instance, things are moving quickly now. I mean, colonoscopy Sunday, CT scan Friday, results and course of treatment Tuesday. I mean, that's moving pretty quickly, and it's all, well, not free because it's financed by the national insurance contributions that people make from their wages every time they get paid. But at least I don't have to sell the house that I haven't finished buying yet. So there's that. You know, I'm not going to be homeless because of this medical condition. And I'm on track now for paying off the mortgage. Thank you very much to everybody, by the way, for all of your support since this bad news came out, because it really has made the world of difference. Okay, well, that's enough of that. In the next episode of Mingles with Jingles, we'll find out exactly how bad it is. And I mean, I'm not going to make you wait that long. I'll probably make a community post on YouTube or something as soon as I get back from the hospital on Sunday. No, not Sunday. Tuesday. After I've spoken with the doctor, I'll do something. I might do a quick video just letting everybody know what the status is. But there'll be another update next week. Possibly surgery, possibly another colonoscopy. Almost certainly have to go on to chemotherapy after that just to make sure they've got it all. But we'll find out for sure on Tuesday. Oh, just reminded me, I had a bit of a Jingles landing this weekend. Oh God, so embarrassing. So, as some of you were certainly aware, because about 100 of you turned up in person, this weekend, Sunday, was the monthly Salt Mines Discord Q&A. Which means that today would normally be the the recording of that for Mingles with Jingles. And as you have probably noticed, that's not happening today. And the reason for that, it's not entirely my own fault, although it kind of is. The reason for that is because, well, I'm not entirely sure what caused the whole thing, but when I have to enable desktop recording to get the audio capture of the whole Q&A on Discord, and it's worked, as long as I remember to actually press the record button in the past, it's worked flawlessly every time. But something just went wrong this time, and I think it's to do with the whole NVIDIA desktop thing. because there's been a sort of beta release of the new desktop software. And this is the first time I've tried to record using it with my Rode Podcaster microphone, or actually with any microphone for that matter. And the weirdest thing, because it was capturing the voices of everybody else who was on the Discord stage, but not me. And it didn't matter what settings I messed and tinkered around with. It just wasn't recording my voice, which was bizarre because, as you can quite clearly hear, the voice capture here in the video editing software is working just fine. But it just wasn't. The whole thing ended up like starting late because I was trying to turn the whole thing on, off and on again. I was doing everything that I possibly could, different microphones, but it just, no matter what happened, desktop capture wasn't capturing my voice. Everything else, no problem, just not my voice. And then I had a brainwave. I thought, well, what about my old Bandicam screen recording software? Does anyone remember my first videos on YouTube? Many years ago when I was using the free version of Bandicam, so I had the watermark recorded with Bandicam on every video, until I eventually, manned up and paid for the full version, and I still have the full version. I just never use it because I use NVIDIA Shadowplay to record all my video now, and I thought, well, let's just have a go with Bandicam. And sure enough, Bandicam worked. Desktop capture, fine. Picked up my voice, fine. Thought, fantastic, I use Bandicam. So there's some kind of problem with NVIDIA Shadowplay. It just doesn't want to recognize any of the microphones that I have. No problem, Bandicam works. Set it all up, started the Q&A, got about 30 minutes into the Q&A before I realised I'd forgotten to start recording. So did it again. So we had a good Q&A though. I mean, it's a shame that I couldn't actually record it, but then again, the stuff that we got up to once I realised that it wasn't recording, and it wasn't going to go on YouTube, so I could get away with saying things and doing things that you couldn't get away with on a video that's going up on YouTube, was actually quite fun. But it did mean that I have to sit down and record this fresh episode of Mingles with Jingles rather than just giving you the copy of the live Q&A. But hey, what can I say? Turn up for the live Q&A and you get, well, hopefully next time I'll actually get the recording. Whatever the hell's going on with NVIDIA and my microphone, I have no idea. But those of you who did turn up in person, you got the raw, unedited version of me, rather than the sanitized for YouTube version that everybody else is listening to right now. So thanks for all turning up, and I hope you enjoyed the bonus content. Right, anyway, moving on swiftly, what's up? What's been going on in the gaming world this week? I noticed an interesting article over at the PC Gamer News website. A conversation between Larian Studios, the developers and self-publishers of Baldur's Gate 3. It was their publishing director, goes by the name of Michael Dowse, who was talking to a website called GameFile about the mass layoffs that we've been seeing in the gaming industry this year. Bearing in mind it's only April, and we're barely even 2 weeks into April, and it's already the worst year ever to be a gaming developer with all of the mass layoffs that have been happening. It's already worse than the entirety of 2023, which was the worst year ever. And it's all as a result of, well, basically, as he said in the interview, none of these companies that are initiating all these mass layoffs, Blizzard, Activision, Ubisoft, none of them are at risk of going bankrupt. They're just at risk of pissing off their shareholders. All of these publicly traded games publishers and developers, publicly traded companies don't exist to make good games. They don't exist to create decent working environments for their employees. They exist to show growth to their shareholders, to make money for the shareholders. That's what happens when you take a company public. And it's one of the reasons why Michael Dowse said that he doesn't ever see Larian Studios going public, because then you'll make a lot of money initially as everybody snaps up the public stocks, but then you don't own the company anymore. The shareholders do, and you have a responsibility to the shareholders to show them a return on their investment. And that means that the development focus necessarily then shifts from making good games to making profitable games. And there's a very subtle distinction there. I mean, because you'd think, well, if you just make a good game, it will sell well, and there's your profits. And, well, yeah, in an ideal world, that's the way it would work. But we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world where great games get pushed out by indie developers that nobody notices because they don't have a marketing budget and they're self-publishing on Steam, and if they're lucky, really lucky, word of mouth gets around and they have success. Games like Subnautica, games like dredge. I'm sure you can all list any number of perfect examples of great games that didn't have a marketing budget but just got lucky and became great successes. And we also live in a world where mediocre shit gets shoveled out by AAA publishers and sells way better than it should because it's backed up by marketing budgets that run to the hundreds of millions of dollars. Oh, let's think of a few examples off the top of our heads. Skull and Bones. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Just to name a couple of recent examples. Warner Brothers, the publishers of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, a game which has not been doing particularly well, by the way, a game which, let me remind you, it's another live service game with season passes and blah-de-blah-de-blah and so on and so on. Didn't do very well, mostly because it's a shit live service game with season passes and blah-de-blah-de-blah, but Warner Brothers announced that due to the relative failure of the game, in future they were going to instead start focusing on, and I'm not making this up, right, they said this with a straight face, due to the relative failure of their live service game with season passes, they were instead in future going to be focusing on live service games with season passes. It's the most bizarre announcement I think I've heard from a major games publisher this year. Although I don't know if it's going to be the most bizarre announcement of the year because, well, the year is but young, isn't it? We're only up to April, so we'll see. We'll see if Ubisoft or Electronic Arts or somebody can top that one. But yeah, getting back to the original point. The second you take your company public, you effectively have given up creative control. Because you're no longer making games for the sake of making games, for, trying to make a good game. Getting a good game made becomes incidental. What you're trying to do is make a profitable game, because you have to show a return on the investment to the shareholders. And what that usually means these days is live service. Because the publishers are always chasing whatever makes the most money. First it was loot boxes. I mean, loot boxes haven't entirely gone away, but the publishers are kind of leery of them now because they're kind of toxic. Live service. This is why you see games like, what was it, Redfall from Arcane Studios? An amazing single-player game developer with a consistently good track record of great games. Well, maybe with the exception of Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, which wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't good either. Mediocre, and that was probably the worst game they'd ever done. And then they came out with Redfall, and they clearly didn't want to do a live service game, but that's where the money is, and the publishers were pulling the strings and paying the bills, so yeah, live service game is what we got, and it was bloody awful. Oh, but yeah, publishers are chasing the live service dollar, so that's what we got. And it's not the only example. I mean, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Rocksteady Studios, another consistently, reliably good quality single-player games developer, responsible for another one of the most beloved franchises in gaming history. Single-player, by the way, franchises in gaming history. The Batman, Arkham Knight, Arkham City, Arkham Asylum series. And when they announced that they were doing yet another game set in the DC universe, everybody got excited. Unfortunately, that game was Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Quite obviously not a game that they were doing because they wanted to make, but a game that they were doing because that's the game Warner Brothers told them to make, because they're chasing the live service dollar. These games get made not because the developers want to make them or even care about them, but because the publishers are saying, you're going to do this because we're the ones paying the bills. Which is, that's their right, because they are the ones paying the bills. They're the ones taking the financial risk, so they're the ones who get to make the calls. And that, unfortunately, is the situation that you put yourself in if you take your game development studio public. Because at that point, you are no longer making games for the sake of making good games. You're making games for the sake of enriching your shareholders. And I really do kind of sympathise for the developers here. Not just because they're being told to make games that they don't want to make. I mean, that sucks, obviously, but remaining independent, and Larian Studios are an exception here, by the way, because they are still an independent studio. They're not a publicly traded company. They don't owe shareholders anything because they don't have shareholders. And it's one of the reasons why Michael Dowse in this interview said that he doesn't really foresee Larian ever going public, because they can afford not to, because they've had such massive success with Baldur's Gate 3. And because they don't have to worry about not upsetting a publisher. They can say what they like to who they like, which I think is hilarious. And that's exactly what he's doing here. But not every game developer is in that position. They don't have the financial security to be able to make the games that they want. I know personally one game developer, and they're in by no means a unique position here. This is the case for most independent games developers, where there is no financial security, that you are literally living from one game to the next, just hoping that it's going to sell enough copies for you to be able to pay everybody's wages and finance the next game. And I mean, it's a horrible it's an exciting situation to be in, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. They need a publisher to take that financial weight off their shoulders and ensure that everybody that they employ still has a job. But the second that you get snapped up by a publisher, you lose a lot of you lose a lot of creative control. That is the price that you pay for not having to worry about ensuring that all of your employees are going to be able to feed their families and pay their mortgages. So you're very much caught between the devil and the deep blue sea here as an independent games developer. You can either stay independent and retain complete creative control and make the games that you want to make, and probably fail and go bankrupt. Because it doesn't matter how good your game is. I mean, making a good game certainly helps, but you're still very much reliant on word of mouth for the success, because you don't have a marketing budget. And it's marketing, not quality, that sells games. I know it's a shitty situation, but that's just the way the world is. So you can stumble along self-publishing your games and probably fail while hoping for a miracle, like, you know, the miracles that happened with Subnautica and Dredge. These are the two examples I keep using because they're, well, the two best examples. Or you can keep your fingers crossed and hope to get snapped up by a publisher with deep pockets to actually market your games, because it's marketing and not quality that sells your games. And then, of course, you kiss goodbye to most, if not all, of your creative freedom. You might get lucky, because not all publishers are evil. There are small publishers out there who do good work with independent game studios, and I'm thinking here of, well, publishers like Team 17, like Annapurna Interactive. Team 17 did, well, amongst other things, Classified France 1944. Annapurna Interactive did some great games. Well, they published some great games. I'm talking games like Stray, What Remains of Edith Finch. Some really, really good games. But the thing about publishers like Annapurna Interactive, and I'm just using them as one example, I mean there are other small publishers out there, the thing that makes Annapurna Interactive different from publishers like Bethesda, publishers like Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, you know, all of the big evil publishers, Annapurna Interactive is a limited liability company. It's not publicly traded. It doesn't have shareholders. They can afford to let developers push the boundaries a little to stretch their wings and be creative and take a risk, because at the end of the day, they don't have any shareholders that they are legally obliged to create profits for. You see the common denominator here. The second your company goes public, that's when you become evil. You don't necessarily know you're becoming evil. You most certainly probably don't go into it with the intention of becoming evil, but you're evil. You've crossed the line. You've sold your soul to the devil at that point, for all kinds of good reasons, most of which probably revolve around just ensuring that all of your employees don't lose their jobs and can actually afford to feed their families. But, well, they do say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And, well, you know, for whatever reason, you made your choice. I'm sure there were good reasons, but the choice has been made. The line has been crossed. You no longer are in a position of making whatever it is that you're making, in this case games, for the purpose of making good games. Instead, you are now having your good name and reputation that you spent all those years developing exploited by your evil publisher in order to flog whatever shitty live service title they have insisted that you produce next, in order to continue showing a return on the investment to all of the shareholders. A lot of those shareholders may not even know what they've made investments in. They've just got this investment portfolio that their broker handles for them. I mean, they have probably zero interest in what those stocks and shares are actually in. They've probably never even heard of Rocksteady Studios, and they certainly wouldn't care that Rocksteady are being forced to make a shitty live service game instead of the sequel to Arkham Asylum that everybody was hoping for. And why should they give a shit? They know nothing about games. They're investment bankers. I mean, they just want to see more money coming out of the investment than they put in. And as long as that continues to happen, they do not care. But the second you get yourself into bed with a publicly traded publisher, that is the situation that you put yourself into. Kiss goodbye to most, if not all, of your creative freedom. You're at the mercy of the publisher at that point. But you do at least have financial stability and security for your employees and your company. Unless, of course, the publisher that you've gotten into bed with is Electronic Arts, who will then just probably tell you to make the next game in the series that you were known for making, and then for no good reason whatsoever change their minds halfway through, pull all the funding, and fire the entire development team. Because that's what Electronic Arts do. Yeah, it's a brave time to be a games developer, isn't it? Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the work that you do, but I don't envy the position that you're in. Anyway, on that depressing bombshell, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I'll keep you all up to date on what's going on with the cancer. As soon as I know anything, I'll let you know. In the meantime, I hope you've had a great weekend. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.